Now we're going to talk a little bit about outside our little bubble. So I just have three quick thoughts for you today. One is Christianity. About that. Number two is a very local example of how we have become who we are as a Christian nation. And Keith, based on your comments, you will appreciate this example. And then why we should not sweat, or why we should sweat now, but not about our future. So, now we would like to think our view of our Christian faith is very clean, pristine, and pretty. However, I would say spiritually, our nation looks more like this example. And so just 2 weeks ago, this came out. What does it mean when people say they are Christian? What does that mean? This is done by George Barna, and if any of you know that name, he does a lot of Christian research and polls and things like that, and is very well accredited. But this is brand new information. And so this is based on the 2020 census. And so the description is how many adults fall within these two faith categories. One is they just say, hey, are you a Christian? And you say yes. That's it. That's the whole qualifying parameter for being in this group. Are you a Christian? Yes. How many people answer yes to that? 69% of our population answer yes to that, which is about 176 million people in the United States. Now, the next one he calls integrated disciples. It's people who identify as Christian, but say they do their best to apply biblical principles. It's more than just saying the want to live biblically. And so, how many people qualify for that? Any guesses? What percentage of the United States population would qualify for that? 15? 30? How much? 15? %. That's 15 million people in the United States have a biblical worldview. So, what does that mean? And what does that look like? Well, we asked that question, are you a Christian? We're going to take out 31% of the population right there. So let's just concentrate on those people who said, yes, I'm a Christian. And then they asked them some questions to kind of see what their thoughts were about Christianity. Well, 79% believe God has a reason for everything. Now, I'm going to show you some statistics, and keep in mind that that means that 21% believe that God does not have a reason for everything. 77% say they have a unique God-given calling, which means 23% don't. 74% say they intentionally try to avoid sinning because they know it hurts God. A quarter of them don't think about sinning. 72% claim that every moral choice either honors or dishonors God. Almost 30% say, moral choices don't really mean anything. It's not going to affect God one way or the other. 62% agree the universe was designed, created, and is sustained by God. But 38% would not agree with that statement. 61% believe God is all-knowing, all-powerful, perfect, and just creator of the universe who still rules the universe today. Almost 40% don't believe that, who say, I'm a Christian. So what does that mean? If you have 69%, that means 176 million people profess to be a Christian. So what else does that mean? These are all of the parameters that we just discussed. These are the people who answered the question after they were asked, are you a Christian? And they said yes. But you can also break this down another way. People who are self-professed Christians can be broken down like this. 29% believe there is a God, but he is not involved in his creation. Which means 71% believe God is involved in the lives of men. So if you take that of the U.S. population, that means 123 million people in the United States believe there is a God and he is involved in his creation. So, what are some other characteristics when people were asked about their Christianity? Well, 72% believe people are basically good. Now, there's a problem with that right there. People are not basically good. At least speaking from my self-awareness. I am not basically good. Okay. 71% consider feelings, experience, or the input of friends and family as their most trusted sources of moral guidance. Well, wait a minute. The Bible's not in there anywhere? They didn't mention it. 66% say that having faith matters more than which faith you pursue. 64% say that all religious faiths are of equal value. 64% of people who said, yes, I'm a Christian. 58% believe that if a person is good enough or does enough good things, they can earn their way into heaven. Not 40% believe that way. The majority of people who say I'm a Christian believe that they need to do good things, or otherwise they're not going to make it to heaven. 52% claim that determining moral truth is up to the individual, and there are no moral absolutes that apply to everyone all the time. What does it say? That people will be lovers of themselves, and they'll have their own way of thinking. And that's quite evident. So, you put all of those things together, and I wanted to point out the two that are in the middle, 66% and 64%. 66% say that having faith matters more than which faith you pursue, and 64% that all religious faiths are of equal value. All we have to do is to ask these people, would you go back to 1978 and remember Jim Jones? Let me just tell you something. Over 900 people in Guyana had extremely strong faith in Jim Jones and were willing to die for it. That's a pretty strong faith. But it wasn't the right faith. So people will fall for anything. So biblical worldview. Let's talk just a moment about that 6%. How are the 6% of Christians who are categorized as having a biblical worldview defined? Well, first, 99% believe that the Bible is the accurate and reliable words of God. 99% believe that God is the all-knowing, all-powerful, and just creator of the universe, who still rules the universe today. Okay? 99% say they have a unique God-given calling. 99% say that they intentionally try to avoid sinning because they know it hurts God. 96% claim that every moral choice either honors or dishonors God. 88% believe that God has a reason for everything. So these are the type of people that make up the 6%. Now, I would like to think the people in this room fall into that category. we try to have a biblical worldview. At least that's my goal, and I think that's your goal as well. But that's the people in this room. So here's all of those claims that we just made, but I would like to help you visualize what 6% really means. The 2020 census, 6% of people who have a biblical worldview and follow Christianity in those regards, you could take and place in the metro area of Houston, Texas. That is the population of Houston metro area, which happens to be about 7.3 million, 7.4 million people. So all the Christians who have a biblical worldview could all live in the Houston metro area. But I want to take that a little bit step further. Let's take that same 6% and let's look at Clay County. Clay County in the 2020 census had a population of 10,210 people. If 6% of the population of Clay County has a worldview, that would be 612 people living in Clay County that have a biblical worldview. Now, let's take our church. We have somewhere probably between 250 to 300 people that call this church their home. Doesn't mean they come here all the time, but they come on somewhat regular rotating basis. And it's probably closer to 250, but I'm going to give us 300. When we walk through that door, if the statistics are true for the people who claim to be a Christian and a part of the Cowboy Church of Henrietta, Texas, it comes down to the people maybe just in this room. Folks, that's scary. We need to have a burden on our heart. Not for the people in Houston, for the people in our little bubble. Our neighbors, our family, the people we come in contact with. Because the time is short. That bubble's going to pop. And we need to be prepared, and the people around us need to be prepared. You know, we see this in our sanctuary. And I had a person that I spoke with recently that had been going to church here says, you know, the way is tough. That narrow way, that cross up there, it's tough on that narrow way. And I'm not sure I live up to that. But when Jesus talks about narrow is the way, I don't believe it's because it's a difficult path. I believe it's narrow because few people choose to even take that path. The wide road looks more inviting. It's narrow not because it's hard, it's narrow because people just don't choose it. So, on to point number 2. A local example of how it has become difficult for people to choose the narrow way. It's the influences that are on our society. I subbed this week in a class, a history class, and I had to pass out this sheet of paper for them to complete. Walter Reichenbach, a Baptist preacher from New York, wrote the following statement in 1917. Becoming a Christian is not a ritual act of individual salvation, but an act of dedication to a religious and social movement. Reichenbach's view was consistent with the message of, and of course the answer there is social gospel movement. Well, I had to figure out who this guy was. Why would a Baptist preacher in 1970 make that statement in his book that he wrote in 1917. So I did a lot of reviewing, looked at a lot of information on this guy, and I could not find this quote anywhere in the information I looked at. I found dozens and dozens of other quotes that could give us indications that he was a part of the social gospel movement. But somebody who's a part of the, if you'll look up there, the TEKS, that's Texas, what is it?
Knowledge and
Skills. It's an assessment test.
No, it's a list.
No, it's a criteria of what we want you to teach. But somebody thought that this particular statement would be the best choice to represent the social gospel movement, when he said so many other things that it could have been of just as convincing. Now, do I think that the kids read that and went, okay, I'll check that off? And it's not that it's one big, huge thing that's going to influence children. In this particular case, is all sophomores in high school. It's all these things combined, all these things that are being thrown at society, just like this one. What if just one or two people in the state of Texas go, you know, Christianity doesn't have anything to do with an individual relationship, and the numbers that I just showed you verified that. That people do not think, as a whole, that Christianity is something about individual relationship with Jesus Christ and individual salvation, because they hear things like this. They don't get the other side. So let's not leave on a negative thought. So why we should sweat now, but not about our future. Biblical Archaeology Review. I've been reading this for several years now, and I just really enjoy it. But it's about archaeological things that apply to biblical findings and so forth. But in here, in the spring article, it had an article, The Garden of Eden. Don't sweat it. And so I want to read you this. But before I do that, I want to show you this verse. In Genesis 3:19, it says, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, because from it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. If you know your Bible, you know that when God expels Adam and Eve from Eden, God tells Adam, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. This occurs just after God curses the earth to sprout thorns and thistles to impede Adam's farming, and just before the dreadful final pronouncement, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. This all makes sense in the context of Adam's prior job, which was to till and keep the garden that God had planted in Eden. In Eden, Adam was a farmer, and he would still be a farmer in the wild side of Eden. The difference is that outside of Eden, Adam would have to work hard to grow food. Or, put it another way, food would require sweat equity. Sweat is a normal feature of our cultured language. Think of Winston Churchill. Iconic speech that said, blood, toil, sweat, and tears. And all of the famous athletes who extol all the virtues of a good sweat. In the Hebrew Bible, though, sweat only comes up here in the Adam and Eve story, and in one other place. In Genesis 3, sweat defines the difference between Adam's bodily experience inside and outside of Eden. Furthermore, sweating or not sweating characterizes the act of farming. Farming in the garden was effortless. The Garden of Eden is diametrically opposed to our reality and to the Israelites' reality. We know this because effort is what Adam is condemned to when he farms outside of Eden. Thorns and thistles are weeds, not something humans eat. The logical conclusion is that in Eden, Adam didn't sweat. The food was easy to grow, easy to harvest, easy to eat. Possibly, your first reaction is, farming. Well, that's a blessed afterlife. But wait. Adam and Eve didn't wear garments. They were naked. The point, however, isn't about Adam and Eve's wardrobe. It's that they did not sweat in the garden. In other words, sweat carries the world, even the human condition, but not in the world where Adam and Eve live in the proximity of the divine. In Ezekiel 44:18, it says this, "Linen turbans shall be on their heads, and linen undergarments shall be around their waist. They shall not put on anything that makes them sweat." The second and of two of the places that the word sweat is used in the Bible. Who are they talking about here? Well, it's the priests. They are not to put on anything or gird themselves in any way that would make them sweat. So in Ezekiel 44:18, God is laying out the regulations for the restored Jerusalem temple. And one of the rules states that when the priests come into the temple, they shall have linen turbans on their head and linen undergarments on their loins. They shall not bind themselves with anything that causes sweat. Here the priests wear linen. Exodus 28:39 and Leviticus 16:4. But more important for our purposes is that the reason seems to be to avoid sweating in the temple. Verse 17 of Ezekiel 44 says this, "And it shall be that when they enter at the gates of the inner court," again, this is the priests, "they shall be clothed with linen garments, and wool shall not be worn by them while they are ministering in the gates of the inner courtyard or in the house. They shall have nothing of wool on them." See, wool, of course, being famous for it's hot, it's warmth. Linen is cool. Apparently, sweat is a no-no in the presence of God. Just as it is inappropriate in the Jerusalem temple where the priests minister to God, sweat was also out of place in the Garden of Eden, God's garden, where, like the priests who bring bread to God's table inside the temple, Adam and Eve were also expected to serve God by caring for the divine. So, when we think of the Garden of Eden, we should picture Adam and Eve as working effortlessly, and the same as the priests when they went to minister in the temple in their cool white linen. So our picture of heaven should be. I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is among the people, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain or sweat." Think of heaven is a place that's effortless and a place without sweat.